Good day, milers. Well, we are ready to start on the build of my Focke Wulf 190 from Nexa. And like most ARFs, we start with the wings. Now you may remember that in my unboxing, I noticed that one of the ailerons appeared to not be glued in. Well, I've since realized that that was wrong. It should have been glued in, and on the right wing half it's fine, but on the left wing half, 2 of the 3 hinges just don't have any glue. So the first thing I'm going to do is glue those hinges in using some thin CA and add a couple drops to the rest of the hinges just to make sure they're in securely. You can always tell when a CA style hinge has enough glue. If the glue wicks in instantly, then it needs a couple more drops. If there's a slight pause while it's wicking, then you have enough glue. Once the ailerons are fixed, the next step is to mount the servos in the wing. I started with the flap servo and used my trusty wire grabber to fish the wire through. Luckily, Nexa provides a string for the aileron servo, so getting its wire through the wing is a snap. Then, drill pilot holes and mount the servos, making sure to use a drop of CA to strengthen each hole. Once you have the servos mounted, attach the control horns to each surface and then connect the control rods. Repeat all the steps for the other wing half and we are ready to move on. One of the nice touches on this ARF is that they provide mounting holes on both sides of the flap servos for the control horns. Using the inner slot for one flap servo and the outer slot for the other allows you to connect your flaps with a Y connector, so you only need one channel on your radio and receiver to control the flaps. The wings are pre-cut for retracts, so they drop right into place after you have assembled them. Mount them using the provided wood screws and then glue the plastic fairings into place. Test each retract to make sure everything works and there is no binding, and we are ready to join the wing halves. So I wanted to show you guys another reason of why you should always do test fittings before big steps like epoxying the wing halves together. So here you can see I have the 2 halves tested together, and you can look, the rear end does not line up. Now that's because the anti-rotation pin and the 2 wing halves doesn't line up right. So I'm going to have to go ahead and sand one of those holes to get the rear end to line up, and then we can proceed with epoxying the wing halves together. The wings go together in the standard way. Mix a bunch of 30-minute epoxy, install the joiner in one wing half, spread plenty of epoxy on all the surfaces, and join the wings. Clean up the excess epoxy, clamp and tape the halves together, and allow them to fully cure. Now, onto the fuselage. Start by aligning the tail surfaces. Mark and cut off the covering where needed, and glue the horizontal and vertical stabilizers into place. Then, mount the elevators to the horizontal stab using the included CA hinges. At this point, I decided to attach the control horns to each elevator half because it is easier to do this now before the rudder is installed. I temporarily inserted the push rods to set the position and angle of the control horns. With that done, we can now attach the rudder, control horn, and finally the tail wheel assembly to finish the rear section of the airplane. With the tail section complete, we are ready to move on to power. Now the original plan was to use my Sato 72 to power this Focke Wulf. It was the whole reason I got the plane in the first place. But, as I feared, going through the build, I've realized the quality just isn't there. So what I decided to do was save the Sato for my next plane, and instead I'm going to power the Focke Wulf with this electric motor, nice Turnigy I had sitting around, and it should power this plane perfectly. So let's get on to that. The first step in mounting the motor is to drill the main firewall and insert the included bolts. The plywood electric motor mount then slides onto these bolts and is secured in place using nuts, washers, and thread locker. Make sure you set the proper distance from the firewall for the motor. The numbers given in my manual were about 10 millimeters off, so best to temporarily mount the cowl and use that as a guide. Once satisfied, mount the motor and find a good spot for your ESC. I had just enough room under the plywood motor mount for mine. With the power system done, I then mounted the servos for the elevator and rudder and installed the push rods. Okay, so the next thing I did was install the included battery tray that came with the plane right here, and it really wasn't strong enough, so I also installed a doubler here just to make sure it's nice and strong, and then covered that in epoxy thinned with alcohol. And then I also installed a tray for the receiver, which is the next thing we need to install. Okay, you can see the receiver is all nice and mounted, and we have all the wires run and tidied up, which means all we have to do is do a test off the ESC, mount the prop, and we are just about done. After that, I mounted the prop and spinner and test fit the battery. My battery was a little too tall, so I had to trim the base of the battery hatch and make a new one that gave enough clearance. Okay, so my build of the Focke Wulf 190 by Nexa is now done. I just did the final CG, and with the battery all the way forward, I had to add just a little bit of nose weight. I also ran up the motor and did an amp check, and we're getting 40 to 45 amps at 6S, or about 1,000 watts of power, which should be perfect for this plane. Now, the big question is, did this plane change my opinion of Nexa after the Piper Tri-Pacer? No. I ran into a lot of the same build issues and quality that I did with that plane, and overall, I just think that you don't get enough value for the money that they charge, so this will probably be the last Nexa that I buy. But more importantly now is, how does this plane fly? And we'll find that out in the next video.